rolling equity leasing.
I am
REL.
At REL, they're not just a leasing company.
We like to work with REL because
They seem to really care about us.
I am REL.
I am REL.
working with REL, it's a national company with a small town feel. REL.
REL.
I am REL.
I am REL.
I am REL.
We feel like we're working with friends. It's like you're having a beer with your buddy.
We are REL. Hi, everybody. John Haldi here with Tim Steiner of REL Solutions. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, John, how are you doing today?
Doing well. As part of our ongoing Truck Love series, Tim, I would love to talk to you today about the seemingly dry but very interesting topic of cost accounting and benchmarking as it relates to truck care. You ready to dive into this one?
Absolutely. A lot of good stuff here.
Good stuff. I'm going to preface, if folks have just tuned in, Tim is a wealth of knowledge, and this stuff could save you a ton of money, even though it sounds dry as far as the topic description. I think you're going to be fascinated by hearing and learning about what Tim does and how he thinks about it. And if you're not already, sharp pencil, green eye shade, it may make you wonder if you should be doing some of this stuff because it can really impact the bottom line. So, Tim, I'm going to start with general accounting for repairs and preventive maintenance, right? Because this is something I've learned a little bit about, and I want you to correct me where I have it wrong. First off, most basic, track everything, right?
Absolutely. You need to make sure you're keeping count of every penny.
Including warranty work.
Absolutely.
And including when your own guy, if you have someone who does things and helps you out and you're paying him $50 or $100 to do something for you, change a belt, change a light bulb, track all of it, right?
Absolutely. Yep. You need a baseline level in order to know exactly where you're at.
Is paper and pen and a binder good enough?
Never quite that easy. These types of accountings that we're talking about start to span long periods of time in entire truck ownership, right? So you're going to want something long form that you can kind of look back on and see the true cost, especially in tough times, right? Tough times make you question whether or not your unit is being profitable. You really need to look at it as a life cycle of a unit versus an individual instance or just a tough time period.
So in my rudimentary understanding, it's not enough to just say, I spent this. You have to categorize it into different buckets, right?
Absolutely.
Are the buckets preventive maintenance, fixing things that broke down, accident repair?
Mm-hmm.
What are the other buckets? Are there other buckets?
Yeah, so you hit a few really good ones. Most of your money you want to go into a preventative maintenance. You want to track your repairs. These are going to be your two major categories. You also want to track driver abuse for certain things that just get broke, whether you ding, another truck, you break a mirror, minor things along those lines. You want to track that as well so you can judge your driver performance and what is actually happening to your unit, the care that they're taking of it. And then depending on what you're doing, there's what's called consumables, right? So you want to see how much oil you're putting in your truck in between oil changes. You want to make sure that you're looking at how much you're spending on your tires. All these different categories, you want to have them sectioned off so you can see what your baseline levels are so you can work towards improvement. As you add different pieces of technology, you're going to get different results. And if you don't have a baseline understanding of where you were, you'll never know whether or not it's paying dividends at the end.
So if you're keeping a ledger, whether by paper or in a spreadsheet or using software, I heard you say PM, preventive maintenance, repairs, accident stuff, consumables. I heard driver abuse.
Yep.
How about time out of service?
Yes, downtime is one of those hidden costs. A TSP, an owner of a company, will absolutely feel that, but that is less of a burden on, say, a maintenance manager or something like that. Everything to do with the truck has a cost, whether it's transporting the unit to a repair facility or having them come out and repair it due to the way that you guys handle your business and you decide to kind of treat your drivers. Hey, they're off today. I don't want them to come in. I want that to keep working. I want them to run when the truck's running. So there's an additional cost, and it's either hidden in the business or it's directly lined up in the maintenance, but it is a cost that you need to be prepared for.
And presumably things like tows that go into the mix, right?
Absolutely, but those are generally a result of the other categories that we're talking about. We can look at tows, but generally that's a play out of, say, a repair or a warranty or something along those lines. If it's a tire, what kind of tire? You know, was it due to low tread? Did we have a blowout? Because then that's a cost of us not paying attention versus a road debris incident.
And I would assume short-term rentals, if you need to rent a truck to replace the one you've got, that needs to be calculated into the math, right?
Absolutely, because you don't want to have a bunch of downtime and have a route be profitable without factoring in the true cost of what went in to make that route profitable. If the truck's down in the shop and you do have to get a rental, that has to be accounted for as almost a cost against the unit when it comes to the entire route. When you're looking at how well a unit performed for your business, everything needs to be factored in, especially these hidden costs, because you end up paying them one way or the other. It's nice to see exactly where they are so that you can work towards improvement.
So in a extreme example, let's say you have a truck that needs some preventive maintenance done. And oh, by the way, something's gone wonky. Maybe it's some sort of motor in the engine, something needs repair. And it recently had a minor fender bender, right?
Yep.
So you take it to a shop, you get a $2,000 bill. It's probably, if I'm understanding you right, important to go through that bill and say, okay, $420 was PM out of this invoice. And so much was accident fix, the fender bender, right? And
Yep.
so much was this. And do you sometimes have to look at some of it and go, well, and I paid a guy $50 to take it each way to the shop that day, and I have to attribute that to and divide that $50 up or just allocate it to a bucket, right?
Yeah, I absolutely would, because like I said, it's a true cost and the TSP owns that cost one way or the other. And it's either just going to be kind of blurred within the business, or you can place it where it truly lies within the maintenance. And to be able to have these pieces allows you a comparable for different solutions, right? If you start to track how many of these $50 you pay out or this, that, and the other, and then you start to compare different options like mobile maintenance versus having your drivers come in and bring your trucks to it, or hey, maybe it's at that halfway point now where I invest in a maintenance manager and I have them go and put their eyes on the truck and drive the truck back and forth to the shop for me. There's all these different pieces that begin to align, and it's all part of expansion, but you can't have a base understanding if you're not reporting it.
So, okay, I want to build on that, because what we've described in terms of tracking all this accounting, to anybody with half a brain would say, what a pain in the ass, right?
Absolutely.
That's the hard work. So let's talk more about what's the benefit of putting that work in from a dollars and cents standpoint and running your business as a TSP. What are some of the questions that if you're doing this data collection and organizing it in a spreadsheet or other software, what are some of the questions that you would have if you were the TSP that you would be asking of the data that you think would be valuable?
Well, I think it's like the categories of your spend, right? We want most of our spend to go into preventative maintenance. That's what's going to avoid these major issues, these downtimes, these roadside events that give you exorbitant cost for very little fix, right? If you're going to have a repair on the side of the road, it's going to be the most minimal repair to kind of get you up and going. It's not going to be the best result. And it's not going to be the most cost efficient. If we can invest most of our time in the preventative service, we're giving those checkpoints, we're replacing those parts at the right place. You know, in one of our previous videos, we referenced dealership versus mom and pop shops, or smaller local vendors, right? You want to make sure that you're trying to get those spend points within the right categories. I want to get this alternator, right? As I notice things are beginning to fail, done in my local area. I don't want to have it done, in a parking lot by a vendor I never deal with, right? It's going to cost me twice as much. And not to mention, I'm gonna have to wait, probably get my load delayed, might get a maintenance infraction. There's a lot of different ancillary pieces that begin to fall on the true cost of the business. The more declines you get, the more of these instances that you have to pay for. It hurts your expansion as well as your wallet.
I'm a data junkie, so try to teach me here. If I've got 10 trucks and I'm collecting all this data, is it fair to say that I should be, or 10, 20 trucks, whatever it is, I should be able to look at that data and as a starting point say, okay, why is this truck got so much more costs in consumables than the other trucks?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's 100% a very valid concern. And there are different pieces within that, right? We can go into driver behavior. Hey, are they inflating my tires? Are they actually checking the oil? Is one guy, spending more on consumables because he's doing what he's supposed to do? The truck isn't running low on coolant. He's adding def, all these different things. But it allows you a point, and I can't overemphasize this enough, that it allows you to judge outcomes, right? Without a real true understanding, you'll never know. And when you compare different routes and different possibilities, you can start to pick and choose where you want to invest in your business for trucks that are performing better versus other ones. And if you can consistently line up those numbers and they're consistent in one area, and one is higher than the other, you can know, hey, I'm going to do business in North Carolina versus California or Nevada or something along those lines. It gives you a pathway to be able to invest from a sound perspective on the equipment front.
Now, I heard someone say at a talk, which I found interesting, trucks have personalities. And that person then backed it up by saying he has actually sold a truck that only had 200,000 miles on it because that personality was something he couldn't deal with. And that he's kept a truck well past 1 million miles because it had a wonderful personality and it just keeps on going.
Right.
And I think that person is I know that person's very data driven. They're not just doing that based on gut feel.
Right. I think that's a nice way of saying, does this truck have ghosts, right? There's different things that happen throughout the course of ownership. And this goes back to some of those category pieces, right? If I have coverage on a unit, but it gets in an accident, right? I might have consistent following repairs that warranty's not going to help with. It's on, record that I had an accident with this unit, and it's just going to keep bothering me consistently and going and going and going. I might repair this, I might repair that. It may or may not fix the issue, may resurface again. But being able to understand the causality along with this is a major factor. If you have one unit that's running very well and you've managed to hit all the PM cycles, that is a unit to hang on to. All of these machines and people that build these units have tolerance levels. Some people have good days, some people have bad days, and that's going to kind of, result from the factory. And you will see some of that, whether it's airlines, whether it's a misapplied slack adjuster, or just anything. All of these different factors need to be looked at. And that data recording gives you that baseline to understand what you're battling.
Would you keep odometer readings with the dollars so that you can look at all these things normalized as cost per mile?
Absolutely. That is your base level understanding for your unit. When you factor everything in and you look back at it over the total course of the life of the unit, that number, the cost per mile, is what you actually want to compare. You just want to make sure that your categories are complete and fully filled out. And this is why I press you to put everything into the truck so you can see how that route, how that unit is actually performing. And sometimes that is a locational thing and it's a challenge to get to the shop, but the truck is doing well. And these are different things that you can compare and you can look at.
Because I would think that you would expect lower costs over time for a truck doing 1,200 miles of spots per week versus one doing 5,000 miles of teamwork, right? But cost per mile should be somewhat comparable.
Yeah, generally, the more the truck runs in a shorter period of time, the less issues I see. When you get seasonal changes and yearly, you go through years and you see winters and you have these degradations of weather, you'll start to see more issues. You absolutely will.
Hold on a minute. You zigged when I thought you were going to zag. The more the truck runs over time, the fewer issues you expect?
The more the truck runs in a shorter period of time, you will see a lower cost per mile generally.
Cost per mile. But in aggregate, the truck may have more issues because it's doing 500,000 miles in 2 years versus 500,000 miles in 6 years. So in 2 years, you would expect lower aggregate bills on the less work truck.
Yeah.
On the truck that runs fewer miles, but per mile, you would expect, okay, I got you. That makes sense.
Yep.
And we mentioned the hidden cost of replacement trucks. The story I heard, which is a great example, transmission problem, it's warranty covered, it's 3 weeks in the shop.
Definitely can
We
be.
need a short-term rental.
Yep.
Okay, it's warranty covered. That truck doesn't get the bill, but if you don't attribute the short-term rental costs to that truck, even though it's for a different truck, you're hiding the fact that you didn't have access to your truck, which might be new for three weeks, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and there's different factors with that too, because if you don't have warrantable coverage, there's no way to push that cost of ownership back onto anyone, right? So if you look back and you find out that you've come up short on some of your warranties, you want to be able to review that. Within that, you might be able to get the rental covered too. So if each category begins to play into the other one, right? And you need to be able to look back to see where most of your repairs are happening, right? If I'm hitting all of my preventative maintenance and I'm still getting these amount of repairs, this might not be a good unit, or I'm just under-equipped on the warranty side.
Okay. And another question that I heard someone pose or explain to me, you could have two trucks doing the same thing, and oh my God, this truck over here has such lower costs in the last 2 years, and this truck has much higher. And you'd think, okay, I want to get rid of the first truck with the higher costs. And then you dig into it and you find out that that other truck with a higher cost has had 7 deer strikes, but it's actually running great.
Mhm.
But it's had those costs. So by bucketing it, you can say, okay, well, you can't treat a deer strike or an accident like that as is the truck a lemon or not, unless downstream it's having a lot of other repair costs associated with it, right?
Right. So just so we're clear, the lemon piece is always a factory issue, right? Whenever we're talking about that, that's a very specific thing. And accidents are something that you want to have bucketed appropriately because they're going to have a very, very large amount of cost, but you only pay the deductible. So there's different factors within this, and you need them placed in the right category so that you can remove those out when you're actually comparing apples to apples. Not to mention, you need to be able to look at ancillary data like telematics and different pieces to see how the driver's treating the unit to see if that has a factor in how the unit is performing.
And I heard someone else say that when they are looking at trucks and they're thinking, wow, is this truck not a great truck? One of the tricks they use is they'll gather data for X number of months, and then they'll swap that truck with another driver who has better performance and look to see if suddenly things shift. And now they know that's probably a driver behavior issue.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great idea. The only thing I would caution you for within that is looking at benchmarks of certain repairs. There's certain points within the life cycle and mileage where you need to do certain repairs, lash adjustments, overheads, different things like that. And if that is coming up on that and it's going to be a factor, you need to put that into the true cost. So you might run into downtime, extra PM within that time frame that you're comparing that wouldn't be applicable to the driver.
Ah, good. Gotcha. Okay. What about monitoring your spend down to the part level?
That's very interesting. You do want to do that within certain instances. It can be very beneficial, but that's where you start to kind of compare experience level versus benefit. If you have a high experience level within maintenance, you can utilize that data to kind of go back and start to check on the life cycle of the parts, individual parts, warranty, all these different things. That data becomes very valuable for you. If you don't really have an outlet for that, if you don't have that knowledge base, this is not one of those quick tips that can kind of turn you around and get you where you need. It's that's much more of an advanced piece that has benefit and you can push back and you can actually start to see different pieces within that. You can see oncoming campaigns. You can start to see particular mileage failures if you have like model units. There's different things that you can gather out of that, but it is not it's not a very simple way to kind of look at it.
Many TSPs have very strong opinions of Volvo versus Mack versus International and specific models and things like that. Does the data tend to support those opinions when you've seen that? Or do you find that data would actually open some folks' eyes and say, you know what, you'd do better over here, even though you think that that's not the better truck?
That's a great question. I deal with so many units that I see everybody's 1 in a million. You know what I mean? I've seen everyone tired of every single brand. It just is what it is. It's your experience. Sometimes it's your service level. Sometimes you're in a spot where the dealerships just are not very accommodating. And that factors into everything else. You start to put off PMs, your repairs don't get done right. There's a lot of different things that play into that. Not to mention, there's different brands that do better under different environments. And depending on whether or not you're in a day cab versus a sleeper, there's cross intersections that bleed into each other. But I guess at the end of the day, whatever they feel is right, because they just get it in their mind, and then every failure after that starts to become, oh, another issue, oh, another issue. So that's a complicated one, but I've seen everybody's failures.
Well, my opinion is it's really worth having the data because, hey, you might love the Volvo 860, okay? And in your geo with your drivers and your loads, it might be the perfect truck.
Yep.
But if your data is telling you something opposite, you should pay attention to it because it might be that you're costing yourself a lot of money by having the wrong truck in that situation.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, you know, if you love the Volvo 860 and you're expanding and you find yourself in an area where there's just not a lot of dealerships, you know, or there's very bad dealerships within your vicinity, another brand might be a much more appropriate option for you. And those are different things that you have to factor in when you're looking at, you know, kind of the brand as a whole. It's not just one piece, it's application, it's service, it's a lot of different stuff.
Now, I know we've talked about a lot of things and I don't want to go too deep into this, but you mentioned total cost of ownership. And I just want to get it out there for folks watching. There's more to this because you also have to factor in what are my lease payments per mile, or what is my cost to buy the truck and my expected resale value at a certain point in time down the road as it relates to depreciable assets, and the interest costs that come with the loans, because the lease makes it easier. You can see that, you know, weekly, monthly. But when you buy a truck, you got to kind of work with your accountant and do that math backwards. That needs to go into the total cost of ownership picture as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely. You know, and there's a lot of different options, right? If you buy a truck, if you own that unit, that's a very, very valuable piece because you might have payments, you might have all these other factors going into it, but then you might get a lump sum back if you sell it at the right mileage point under the right conditions. And that might drastically reduce the entire cost of ownership. You know, if you can come up positive, you know, 25, 30K, you know, by divesting of the unit, that's those payments back. That's cost of ownership, that unit back. Resale value is a major piece of owning a vehicle or pathway to own. You know, there's different lease programs that, you know, without getting too specific, that allow you different sections to make different decisions. And if you like the way a truck performs, you might, you know, you might want to lease it, but it might have crap on the resale value. So you might not want to buy it out, right? You might want to lease a new one of that same brand and keep rolling with it. There's different factors to each of these.
And it's certainly a very viable strategy to either lease or buy new equipment. The warranty is a big factor in that as far as the repair costs. But of course, that means you're buying new equipment. And there's pros and cons to that, right?
Absolutely.
And I will say this, we're not going to go too deep into it, that it's also a viable strategy to buy used equipment that doesn't have a warranty. You have to expect higher repair costs. But if you can buy a truck for 40K off warranty from someone with 500,000, 600,000 miles, you have a much lower payment involved in that, as opposed to getting new equipment and depreciating it down. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but there's lots of different strategies and you have to figure out over time what works best for you. And you'll never make an informed decision if you're not tracking all the stuff you've been talking about.
Absolutely. And know what to expect from your unit, right? If you're going to get a new unit, run it heavy, right? Find a place where you can run that unit. You can get some good mileage on it. You can utilize that unit enough to make it actually pay for itself. These are not cheap pieces of equipment. They're very expensive. And if you are going to go into a higher mileage used unit, know what to expect. Keep it close to you. Keep it in a, you know, good service range. You know, you can use it as a spare so you don't run into these maintenance infractions. There's a lot of different options for all of these. So I think that's a very valuable point.
Tim, we're kind of pushing against the time that we had allotted to talk about this. I've asked you a ton of questions, but as I always ask, what did I forget to ask you that's important that you want to share with folks?
Just make sure you're bucketing everything appropriately. There's different maintenance tracking. There's different softwares that you can use. One thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to start discarding certain things just because they weren't very expensive. Over the course of the life of the unit, these things begin to add up and may make a difference. You know, when you're looking at either A, buying your warranty, or B, choosing your branded unit. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. So just make sure you're trying to get as much data as possible to keep yourself as informed as you can.
And I would layer onto that, that whatever method you use to track, software, Excel, paper, whatever, make sure that it's very easy for you to say, I want to see the history of this truck and do some analysis on it by buckets. I want to look at the history of different make, models, and years and see if there's trends that would inform me about things. I want to look at my history by vendor. So
Yep.
I can see dealer costs versus mom and pop shop and whatever, and probably ideally be able to say by geo. So you
Yeah.
can start looking at that. And in a perfect world, have some records about who's been driving that truck primarily, in case it's a driver behavior issue.
Also factor in your fuel, right? That's a major, benefit to generally having newer units, is they, more often are more fuel efficient. It's total impact on business that you want these numbers to play into.
And for anybody who hasn't seen all the different videos that Tim and I have done, and I've done with other folks, it is possible to get a fuel P&L by truck. It's not that complicated. And if you don't know how, reach out to me. I can explain how you can do it by hand, or there's software options. But honestly, if you've got a truck doing 6.2 miles per gallon, it's costing you money in fuel the way FedEx reimburse. Whereas if you're doing 7.5, it's making you money. And so in the total cost of ownership picture, you want to include that in your math to figure out, do I like this truck or not like this truck?
Absolutely.
Tim, we're going to share your contact info, but as always, a million thanks for sharing all your wisdom and your time doing these things. You've been a blessing to the community.
Thank you very much, John. It's always a pleasure talking to you, buddy.